Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren, and we've got Dave Old-Fashioned Martino co-hosting on this show today.
That's right. Yeah, my favorite drink.
Yeah.
My favorite cocktail. Yeah.
I didn't know what that was in that. I'd never really realized.
No, yeah.
I worked as a
Whiskey,
bartender way back in the 80s of last
really?
century, and no one ever ordered that. In any place I ever worked in.
It's too old-fashioned to order it.
And I'm not sure if I ever learned it. Maybe someone taught it. Maybe I did have it in my, education. But, no one ever
A little
has.
bitters, a little simple syrup, a little whiskey.
Why not just do whiskey shots?
Oh, yeah, I like to appreciate the whiskey.
Oh. Yeah, and if you want to see Dave appreciating his whiskey, just go to his Facebook and any social media and see him.
You can go to TikTok, too. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Instagram. I think the video's on Instagram, too. I'm not sure.
Yeah. What stays there in Brooklyn, stays there or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's actually Queens.
Queens.
Flushing, Queens. Yeah.
It'll never be
causing
the same.
trouble. They won't let me in. They won't let me back into New York.
Yeah. Brooklyn's closed.
Unwanted posters.
Yeah. Well, and that's a different story. But anyway. Well, speaking of other horrors around not just whores, but horrors, we've got an author here that is writing in the horror genre, I believe. So we'll talk to him here. And the book we're talking about is Shaded Grove, and it's Oliver C. Seneca. So thank you for being here, Oliver.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So what's going on, Oliver? Do you consider yourself a horror writer? I see, the reason I ask is because I see different, categories in, like when you go to Amazon and place like young teen, adult, ghost stories, literature, fiction. What do you call it yourself?
I would say it's mostly horror. Maybe, one could argue a little bit of thriller in there, although I kind of think those two genres can be like one and the same. But I would say horror is the core of what I do.
What is a good horror to you? Like, is it mental stress and suspense, or is it more graphic and gore? Like, where do you kind of fit?
That's a good question. I would say for me, I'm more on the unsettling side. I tend to like things that are atmospheric. Something's wrong, something's not right, and there's a darkness in the air. There's something that's off that the characters have to figure out and maneuver through. That's not to say I don't love the other types of horror and subgenres, but for me, I've always just enjoyed the atmosphere of horror, that things are just not what they seem, and it's time to investigate.
It's a good thing we live in a world where we don't have to deal with that kind of stress. Everything's settled,
Yes, there's nothing wrong at all. Everything is perfectly fine.
Yeah, I don't have that feeling of darkness ever. It's always happy and airy, put on my flowered dress and go. Listen, but I'm being a little older. I grew up with Twilight Zones and some of the Rod Serling sort of stuff, and a lot of the Hitchcock and all that stuff. So there is a lot of suspense and kind of horror in my history. But for me, a lot of that always had meaning. You know what I'm saying? Like you'd watch the Twilight Zone, one of the episodes. At the end of it, there was always a subject matter, so to speak. It wasn't just about fear and horror. Do you do sort of the same thing, being that you like that?
Absolutely. I always like to have some kind of underlying tone, even if it's just very subtle. But I find that a lot of the times when I'm writing, it always comes back to some kind of family message, something to do with relationships with whether it's your parents or your brother, a friend of yours or something like that. I always, for whatever reason, it always just comes back to that. There's always some kind of message about relationships.
Well, that's interesting. So do you involve a lot of your own life in there then? Is there a personal touch to your stories?
Oh, for sure. I would say especially with Shaded Grove, the book that just came out, the relationship between the two sisters is very much similar to the relationship I have with my brother. We're close, but we have our differences. We have kind of clashing personalities. I wanted to put that in this book to kind of see if two different personalities can come together and get through a horrific situation. I try not to put too much of myself in my writing, but I think sometimes it just, naturally happens. I think if you make anything, even outside of books, if you do anything creative, I think it's impossible not to have some of your own situations and stories of your life, you can't help but have them leak into the story somehow.
Well, yeah, because then I think that makes it more real. It makes your characters more real too, because it's believable. There's some real emotion that comes out of you into it, even if it's not exact. It's still got the same, like you talk about you and your brother compared to two sisters, right? It may not be the exact sort of thing, same thing you guys go through, but it's still there.
Absolutely, for sure.
Now that's interesting, because so Shaded Grove, what's the premise of that book?
So we have these two sisters. They're driving back home from a haunted house tour out in the middle of this small town called Shaded Grove, which is just a tucked away little place, backwoods kind of town. No one really knows about it. They're driving home in the rain, and all of a sudden they find this strange old woman walking in the middle of the road. So they pull over. They're trying to help her out. They're trying to get her to the hospital. They're trying to GPS it and try to, get this woman to safety. But she's acting very erratic, and her mood is shifting by the second. So they're trying to help her out, but she's, going from angry to sad to happy. And she's making these wild claims that she knows these two young women. And then all of a sudden she has this big outburst, and then it causes the car to crash and roll down a hill. And then when the sisters both wake up, the woman is gone, and they're, not far from this isolated property of the Shaded Grove Mental Hospital. And so they think it's abandoned, but a security guard lets them in. But of course, once they get inside, some strange things start to happen, and they can't get out. So the story is about these two sisters, with their clashing personalities and everything. One believes in ghosts and the afterlife, the other one does not. Of course, she'll have to reconsider her belief system as the story goes on, but it's just about them trying to escape and the different twists and turns that happen, and the wild discoveries that they make while behind the locked gate of the Shaded Grove Mental Hospital.
Well, maybe that lady they picked up, she was drinking too many old fashions.
Maybe that
could be that simple. You never know.
Yes.
Did you find it difficult writing as two woman characters? And I mean this in the fact of whose point of view did you write from, or was it both of their point of view, or was it from an outside point of view? Like how did you write that?
Yeah, it does kind of go back and forth a little bit, but I would say the main character is Diane, the younger of the two sisters. I primarily wrote from her point of view because she's more in tune with spirits and the afterlife and stuff like that. And it's, just more about her journey and her relationship, with her older sister. And, it was a bit difficult. I normally don't have this. I think this is the first time I've ever wrote anything from, perspective of women. So it was a different kind of exercise for me. But, I think in the end of the day, it all worked out. And whether it's sisters, brothers, I think siblinghood pretty much has the same themes, no matter, which gender you are. You love, you hate. And at the end of the day, you hope that you can come together and work things out.
Right. There's a human aspect to people that you can write, and it doesn't necessarily have to focus on, a sexual aspect.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Well, when you're writing teen and young adult type books, do you have to kind of hold back on some of the content that goes in it? Is that something that you need to do? Do you need to really think about what you're putting into the work as opposed to maybe what you would put into adult fiction?
Absolutely. And what's funny is originally there was a lot of cursing in this manuscript. And my editor said we're gonna have to, since this is technically young adult, we can't have it too many F-bombs and stuff like that. Especially these days, young people do curse and they say dirty things and stuff like that. So I was trying to keep it, authentic to how I know that young people talk. But of course, when it comes to the business side of things and marketing and the demographics, you do have to kind of rein it in a bit and censor it just a little bit. And of course, I couldn't make any of the horror scenes too graphic. You can't have it too bloody, too wild in that regard. So I did have to take some things out, fix up the dialogue, clean it up a bit. But I think, still at the end of the day, it works. I think their personalities are still intact. Yeah, it was interesting having to kind of just shave a few things off to make it work for the the YA crowd, as they say.
Oh, as long as you didn't describe how you shaved it.
This is part of the uncut podcast version.
This is the yeah. This is the good stuff here. When you're working with your two main characters, and even the lady that they picked up, so you've got these characters. How do you write the dialogue? What's the situation in your head and in your room? Do you have relationships? Do you kind of have these characters developed in your mind and they actually communicate with each other and you kind of know how they're going to act and react, or do you kind of ad-lib? Like, what's your process there?
Well, I do try to outline some things and have a path, but I find that no matter how much I outline or do these things on the side, it does kind of just take control of itself. Like it just kind of goes where it goes. So I have like a good starting point, a general idea of how I want them to interact, but then as I'm writing the story, it does kind of go in its own direction, and I'm just at some point I'm just kind of along for the ride. You know what I mean? Like it almost takes on a force of its own, and I just kind of let it rip.
Well, can you hear the thoughts of your characters? Do you hear their voice? Is it more visual? How do you really get into that character and create them and project them onto the page?
Sure, yeah. Honestly, the characters of Megan and Diane were based off this duo, this sister musical act called Meg and Dia, or Meg and Di. I can't exactly remember how you say their names, but they're both these dark black-haired sisters. And I remember listening to their music and seeing their music video, and I was like, oh, like this would be a good like set of characters for a story. So I actually am picturing this duo in my head when I'm writing these characters. That was kind of like the launch pad to get their aesthetic down. And then, of course, as I write the story, I do get attached to the characters, and I can think what they're thinking, and they each have their own different like music tastes, and they of course they have their own different belief system. There's one that's the older sister's, of course, is more bound in reality. She's very cynical. And then the younger sister's, free spirit and new age, as they say, and she's into stones and crystals and stuff like that. So I was getting into all that.
And so your perspective on that, you must have your own personal, are you into supernatural afterlife and all this and spirits and stuff like that? Or are you kind of do you not buy into that sort of thing? Like or do you have kind of how do you put yourself into that situation?
Yeah, I've always been interested in spirits and ghosts and stuff like that. My older brother definitely believes in them. He's had some experiences with mediums and different ghost tours. He's seen things and heard things. I personally have never had any experience. I've been hoping to have some kind of paranormal encounter, but I've definitely always been interested in the whole lore of all that stuff. So I guess that part is actually not like in the book, where one believes and one doesn't. I do believe, even though I haven't had a personal experience, but I feel like there's enough stories out there and enough things that have happened in human history that I feel that there's something beyond this. There's some kind of energy out there. There's something going on after we pass, but I've just yet to see that directly.
Right. Yeah. You need a few more old fashions.
That's right.
There you go.
Yeah, and then things get easier. It only gets better.
Makes it smooth.
That's right.
So where do you see yourself with horror going? Do you find that this is kind of the genre you want to be in, or is there something more?
I think so. I'll probably stay in horror for a little while. As I write more horror, though, as I was saying before about stuff with family, it always comes back to family stuff. I do find myself liking more the characters as opposed to the plot. And I find myself sometimes writing stuff that isn't so much horror, but maybe it's, has some darker tones, but it's focused more on the characters and their lives and their development. Sometimes I think, well, maybe somewhere down the line I'll just write regular literary fiction, that doesn't have speculative fiction elements to it. So perhaps that might be my future, but I have a lot of ideas that are spooky and more on the horror side, and I'm trying to hit every kind of sub-genre, like, I want to do one about a slasher, a serial killer. I want to do one that's maybe science fiction horror. I want to do one that's, demonic, possession, exorcism, stuff like that. So I'll probably be in the horror genre for a good long while.
Right. Yeah. I try to exercise every day.
And how's that working out for you?
Well, it's not too bad. Not too bad.
Oh, good.
I'm doing okay. Yeah, I'm doing okay, actually. I lost my hair, but I'm doing okay. But I'm thinking, a lot of times if you go outside of your genre, even if you read outside or go to different types of books, and then you can incorporate that into your characters, even in a horror book, to make it a fuller story, more depth to it and stuff. I don't know if you do that. Do you find you read and follow other types of writings, or are you big fan of just all horror?
No, I will read it all pretty much. I really enjoy old literature, like of Mice and Men and Catcher in the Rye and stuff like that. I find those books to be very compelling. I like reading people's biographies and historical stuff like that. So when I initially got into reading, it was just horror, but it quickly did get into the other genres, and it kind of just opened the floodgates. Reading pretty much whatever I can get my hands on, as long as it's I can relate to something in it in one way or another. I'll pretty much check out any title.
And it was interesting how you bring up. You said this was off in a small town and stuff. Now, do you take a real town and develop it after that small town, or do you kind of create this whole image? And even Shaded Grove, is this after a real institute, or is this something you've just developed in your mind?
Yeah, well, the institute is based off an old hospital in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. My father grew up in the city, and he knows, all the different places and stuff. So, and I work with my father, and he's an attorney, and so we would be in the city often for, filing legal documents and stuff like that at the courthouse. And so while we're out there, he'll take me down different streets and stuff and show me different sites. And there was an old mental hospital there that was no longer running. It wasn't full on abandoned. The buildings, still stood and everything looked okay, but it just wasn't active. So it was just kind of like this looming ground with these buildings and whatnot. And I remember it was a very foggy day when he showed me this, so that added to the whole aesthetic. So I just thought it was interesting that these big buildings and stuff, at one point were active. Patients were coming and going, and there were doctors and nurses and stuff working in there, and then all of a sudden it just stopped, and it's just kind of sitting there. So I wanted to take that imagery and plant it in like a small rural town, which is, just based off some of the western towns in Pennsylvania that are, just out somewhere in the valley somewhere. My grandmother used to live out in a country bumpkin place when I was younger, and I would go with my mother and brother. We would go out there, and it was, kind of spooky and creepy at night and stuff like that. So I'm kind of blending imagery that I found in the urban setting, put it out there in the countryside, and just making something spooky happen with that recipe.
Right. Do you follow kind of the standard ideas of what ghosts and haunted and all that is in other places, other books, other movies and stuff like that, or do you kind of have your own rules?
I would say my stuff's pretty standard. I mean, I know in Shaded Grove, the idea of things looping, ghosts kind of coming back to the same spot and doing the same thing over and over again until their soul can move on. You know what I'm talking about? Or the idea of like the astral planes, like spirits trying to get through the different dimensions to reach the humans and connect with us. Sometimes they have to push other spirits away to contact whether it's the medium or the Ouija board or whatever. I put that in there, and pretty standard stuff. I think one reviewer said I'm not reinventing the wheel, but it's all good. So with this book, it's pretty standard. It's nothing too wild.
Well, I mean, I think the characters are the most important anyway, right, in a story. They're what people stick with or what resonates with people, and you could even use them in other books sometimes if they remain alive in your book, you know what I mean?
For sure. No, absolutely. That's for me what it's always been about, the characters and their relationships and what they go through, and are they changed by the end? Are they changed for the better? Are they changed for the worse? That's the stuff I like to explore.
Yeah. Do you find that it changes you when you do this sort of thing? Like when you're involving things that you relate to, that you can get involved with, like, your brothers and having two sisters and the afterlife and all these things. It makes you think, right? You process all of these things as you go through the book. and you're
Absolutely.
rating it and stuff like that. Do you think that process in itself maybe changes you or develops you somewhat?
That's a great question. I think it does, honestly, and especially with Shaded Grove, it also deals with a lot of like mental health topics. It was certainly interesting, in the light research that I do, seeing some of the barbaric things that we would do to patients who were suffering from mental illness, and kind of opening my eyes to like, wow, like we did some pretty twisted stuff not that long ago to people trying to cure this almost invisible illness. Like, where do you start with mental illness sometimes? And, questioning, what we're doing today. Like, are there things that we're doing today that, 50 years from now we'll look back and be like, oh my God, can you believe we did that? When we should have been doing this all along. So it gave me a better appreciation for, people who, went through some of these controversial treatments, and, people that are going through it now, and, they're just, hoping to find a cure for themselves.
Yeah, I've written a lot in history and stuff, and I know that we've done terrible things to ourselves, and other people and I think we'll continue to do it. And I think, easily 50 years they look back and go, wow, these people were crazy. And
Right, exactly.
in the 2000s, see what they were doing? They'll have an endless amount of stuff to talk about.
Yes, for sure.
Lots of TV movies for this. So where do you see stuff going now? What's next? Or what are you working on now?
Well, I just finished, I put together some of my short stories. I'm hoping to get a collection out maybe next year at some point. I have a few short stories that have been published in various little anthologies, and then I have some, of course, that have not been published. So I put them together and sent them to my one if they'd be interested in putting that out maybe next Halloween. And then I have a shorter book, a novella, if you will, which I'm waiting to hear back on with a different publisher, which is more of a psychological horror about this woman who recently lost her mother, and she had a kind of a tumultuous relationship with her. See, I'm bringing it back again, another familial themed book, relationships, a mother and her daughter situation. But that's kind of like a dark psychological story. So I'm waiting to hear back for the editings on that. We might have to make it longer. We might keep it the same. I'm not sure what's going to happen with it, but I'm excited to see where that goes. And outside of that, I'm always kicking around ideas, and I'm always outlining something. I might do another young adult horror story. I might go back to just doing regular 18 plus kind of things, but I got a lot of things happening. I'm as I'm sure, creative people, it's almost like ADD. We're just all over the place. We want to do this and that. I try to lock myself in and try to focus on one thing at a time, because I'll start something and I'll be like, let me do I want to do something with a vampire. It's like, no. Let me finish this manuscript first before we work with the vampire. We'll get to that later. So I'm just trying to stay focused and keep the words coming.
Yeah, that's all you can do, right? Don't get carried away with a vampire. You lose too much blood.
Exactly. We can't do that.
But short stories are particularly different. You have to have kind of a method or a way of being able to express a lot of things in a very very short time. You know what I mean? You have to use your wording has to be very precise, because the reader has to be able to understand the characters without you being able. You can't really flesh them out like you do in a novel. You right. Just have to get it across. So that's a particular type of writing. Do you like doing that better than the long stories, or?
Yeah, it's true. Like, it's tough for me, because I feel like I can go on and on about the different characters and stuff like that. So it is difficult for me to condense it down to, less than 10,000 words. I think it is a fun exercise to do. The way that I like to do it is I will look at different publishers and see what theme they're looking for a short story, and that will help me kind of, get it more focused. Like, for example, there was a story that I wrote that the publisher was looking for short stories. It was horror based around like mushrooms and fungi and like earthly nature things. So like, okay, so that kind of gives me, a specific thing, so I can kind of work around that. Because without that, I feel like it's hard for me to just jump into a short story, because, with me, it could go on and on and on. It could become a novella. It could be, a novel, whatever. But I do like to do it in between, my more heavier, meatier manuscripts. As long as I can, get that little idea at the beginning. If they give me a theme, I'm good to go. If not, it's tough for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, listen now, or do you do social media? Do you do a website? Do you like to have interaction with readers?
Absolutely. Yeah. My website's olivercseneca.com. It's, has all my stuff on there. And, I primarily use Instagram and Facebook. To be honest with you, it's tough for me. I don't like doing a whole lot of promotion. I feel like I bother people too much sometimes with my work because, when you work with small publishers, there's not really a budget for marketing, and you really have to do all of it by yourself. So I don't like to do too much pushing of my work. I try to be as tasteful as I can, but I've met a lot of great reviewers and other authors out there over the internet, and I'm very grateful to have a little support system and people that are willing to read my stuff early and give me honest feedback, and reach out to me if they love the book, or if sometimes they hate the book.
Well, we'll put all that on our website too, so people can find you easily. And so reviews are important to you. Do you really kind of follow up with reviews, or do you stay away from them?
Oh, there's a team of reviewers that I've used over the years who I can always count on to, be honest and thorough with their feedback. I try not to get too involved, because the problem is anybody can leave a review, and I've gotten 1-2 star reviews that were actually helpful, like that were actually like honest, they took the time to explain why they didn't like it. And then you get a 1 or 2 star review and it's just like one line, and it doesn't, it really makes sense, and it's, just kind of throws you off. So I primarily just pay attention to the reviews that I could tell that the person actually read it or attempted to read it and took the time to really explain themselves. For the most part, I don't really read too many of them personally.
Well, you can always hunt down the bad ones and then, kill them off in your next book.
Yeah, there you go. That's a great strategy. No, that's true. Yeah, we do hone in on the negative ones, even because with Shaded Grove, like this is actually my most best critically reviewed book out of the 3 that I've done. And despite that, sometimes you hone in on the one 3-star review or the 1-star review. You're like, oh, I'm a fraud. I don't know why we do that, even though there's all these other wonderful positive reviews. You see that one, it's like, what, I got to hang this up. I'm no good.
It's tough. It's tough to put yourself out there and express feelings and then have someone kind of just trash them. And, yeah, I totally understand. I think we all do. Anyway, we move on. We kill them and move on.
That's right. That's all we can do is just, kill them and get on with our lives.
The book, Shaded Grove, pick it up. And our guest has been the author of that book. It's Oliver C. Seneca. So thank you.
Alan, it's my pleasure. David, thank you.
Thanks, Oliver.